No one in that smoke-choked saloon had the faintest idea. They were rubbing shoulders with the most lethal gun hand on the frontier. In a dark corner, an old, dried-up drifter cradled a glass of cheap whiskey that could peel paint, swallowing insults the way other men swallowed liquor quietly without a word. His silence was like a drawn blade, cold, honed, and waiting. To the rest of the room, he was just another shadow. But as the minutes crawled by, the hush around him grew heavier than a loaded Colt. That weight would soon turn into a death warrant. The Black Ace Saloon throbbed with mean laughter, out-of-tune piano notes, and a haze of cigar smoke thick enough to chew. It was the year 1884, and the town of Copper Ridge lived under the heel of one man, Victor Kyne, ruthless boss of the Wolf Kane gang. Every alley, every business, every coin that clinked in a till, Victor skimmed his share. Even the whiskey that burned men's throats seemed to answer to him. Where his men walked, fear padded along behind them like a loyal hound. But this night, something didn't fit the usual pattern. At a corner table sat a man who didn't match the rest of the filth and noise. Nathaniel Cross, 68 years old. Hair the color of moonlight on river water, skin tanned and scarred by decades beneath unforgiving skis. His hands, though lined with age, were steady as iron. No one could figure out why an old relic like that had wandered into a helpet like the Black Ace. Victor Kyne studied him with the lazy scorn of a man used to owning everything he saw. An antique, he thought, a joke, a scarecrow someone forgot to tear down. He sauntered over, his men snickering behind him, already grinning for the show they knew was coming. Victor snatched the bottle from in front of the stranger and upended it, letting the cheap whiskey cascade over the old man's head. "Welcome to my corner of hell, Grandpa," he jeered. "I own every inch of this town." Nathaniel didn't answer. He simply looked into his empty glass as if nothing at all had happened, as calm as a stone in a riverbed. The silence stretched. Then the air changed. There was something off about this old man. Something locked down tight inside him like thunder coiled behind distant clouds, waiting for the right spark to tear the sky open. One of Victor's gun hands leaned closer and muttered, "Boss, there's something wrong with that old fella's eyes." Victor slammed his hands into the table. The glass toppled and shattered against the floorboards. The old man didn't even blink. He only lifted his gaze for a heartbeat, a flat, empty stare, cold and distant. That was no ordinary cowhand's look. That was the gaze of a man who had walked beside death and never once stepped aside. Before I tell you how a 68-year-old stranger turned into the living nightmare of 25 armed killers, take a second to show some support, tap that like button, hit your name to this channel with a subscription, and let me know down in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, wherever you are, I'd be honored to know. Now saddle up, partner. Because what Nathaniel Cross is about to unleash on Copper Ridge isn't just revenge. It's a verdict written in gunpowder and spilled blood. Stay close. The streets are about to be washed clean in red, and the legend of the silent rider is about to step out of rumor and ride right in front of your eyes. Copper Ridge was the kind of town heaven overlooked and hell remembered by name. 3 dusty streets. 1 bank. A church with no preacher. And a saloon that never bothered to sleep. Law had passed through once years back, but it hadn't liked what it saw. It kept on writing. Copper Ridge became outlaw ground, and Victor Kyne, without a crown or a courtroom, ruled it all the same. 2 years earlier, Kyne and his pack had torched the sheriff's office and strung the mayor up from the telegraph pole like a warning sign. From that day on, no one had dared raise a hand against them. They bled the town dry, collecting taxes, running cattle off, brutalizing women at whim. The whole place inhaled fear with every breath. Nathaniel Cross rolled into town on a Tuesday. He stepped down from the stagecoach with no luggage to speak of, no obvious iron on his hip, just a tired saddlebag and a hat that had seen too many summers. He paid for a room at Widow Harrison's boarding house with dull silver coins that carried the weight of old years. He didn't chat. Didn't pry. He simply watched. The widow, curious as any soul in a small town, asked where he'd come from. In a voice rough as gravel he answered, "From a place that's gone now." That first evening, Nathaniel took his meal alone at the saloon. whiskey in one hand, a strip of dried meat in the other. Around him, men roared at bad jokes, cursed over poker hands, and smashed bottles when luck turned. One brute they called Razor Jim spotted the stranger. "Look here, boys," he slurred, "fresh meat." He staggered over, ripped Nathaniel's hat off his head, and dangled it like a trophy. "Old bones don't last long in Copper Ridge, Grandpa, you rode here to die." Nathaniel chewed slowly, those steady eyes never leaving Razor Jim's face. When he spoke, his words came out like ice. "I came to settle accounts." Razor Jim barked a drunken laugh. "Settle what? Old scores, the kind you pay for in blood." For a heartbeat, the whole saloon went quiet. Razor Jim's grin faltered. He bent, spat straight into Nathaniel's plate, and staggered back to his table, the gang howling. The old man carefully wiped the spit with his sleeve, finished his meal as if nothing were wrong, placed his coins on the table, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he stopped and turned back. His gaze swept Razor Jim's table, lingering on each face, one after the other, as if he were writing their names on an invisible list. Outside, under the yellow halo of oil lamps, the night wind knifed down the street, doors rattled on their hinges, shadows stretched long across the dust. Somewhere in the buried past, the name Nathaniel Cross had once been whispered with dread. A name people had tried to forget. A name Copper Ridge was about to remember. What was this old man hiding? Keep listening. Widow Harrison's boarding house smelled of lye soap and old pine. Nathaniel climbed the stairs slowly, every step deliberate, the measured pace of a man trained for decades to control even the smallest movement. His room was bare, a bed, a chair, and a single window overlooking Main Street. He sat on the edge of the mattress and reached into his saddlebag, pulling out the only thing he owned that held real value, a faded photograph, edges curled with age. In the picture stood a young lawman wearing a badge. Beside him, a beautiful woman cradled a boy of about 10. Nathaniel's thumb traced the woman's face. His eyes grew damp, but no tears fell. He hadn't cried in many, many years. The last time had been in 1871, when he'd come home to nothing but cinders, and the charred remains of his wife and son buried beneath the ruins. The men responsible were railroad enforcers, company guns who cleared land however they pleased. Nathaniel hunted them for 3 long years, tracking them across deserts and canyons. He found them one by one, and not a single one met a quick, easy death. When the last man's screams finally died away, Nathaniel disappeared. He turned into a whisper. A campfire tale. The silent rider. The gunman who never missed. Who showed mercy to no one. Who left behind nothing but cooling bodies and the hush that follows a storm. For decades after, he holed up in the mountains, living like a ghost, trying to wash the taste of vengeance out of his soul. Then, 4 weeks earlier, a dying traveler had staggered to his cabin door, begging for water. Nathaniel gave it. On his last breaths, the stranger spoke of Copper Ridge, of Victor Kyne and his men, and he mentioned a name that froze Nathaniel's blood. Marcus Sutton. The only man who had slipped through Nathaniel's noose 16 years ago. The one who had planned the burning of his home. The one who had given the order while Nathaniel's family slept. Marcus Sutton now served as Victor Kyne's right hand. Nathaniel pulled off his boots and lay back on the bed fully dressed, the photograph resting on his chest. His hands trembled not with fear but with memory. His fingers recalled the exact weight of a revolver, the pull of a trigger, the familiar scent of gun oil. Out in the street, the saloon's laughter rolled on, blind and careless. They didn't know the silent rider had opened his eyes again. Copper Ridge, without knowing it, had already signed its own death papers. A storm was rolling in. Don't blink. Morning arrived with a brutal sun, turning the streets into pale, blinding rivers of dust. Nathaniel woke before first light just as he always had. He stretched with slow, precise movements. Every bone complained, but every muscle obeyed. Downstairs, Widow Harrison had coffee waiting. Morning, Mr. Cross, she murmured. Sleep never sits long with me, ma'am, he answered, but I got through another night. She placed black coffee and a crust of bread in front of him. As he ate in silence, he watched the street through the window. Kyne's men were already on the prowl, shaking down shopkeepers for money. One brute hammered his fists into an old merchant who came up short. The man collapsed in the dust. No one moved to help. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around his cup. The widow saw the change in his eyes and felt a chill. "Don't step into it, Mr. Cross," she whispered. "Those men kill for sport." Still stirring outside, he said softly, "I know, I used to do the same." Her face drained of color. She found no more words. Nathaniel stepped out into the blazing light. The sun cast his face in shadow as he walked toward the market with a slow, even stride. The shopkeeper lay on the ground, bleeding a thin line of red into the dust. The thug who'd beaten him, a mountain of a man called Ox, laughed with his friends as if it were all a joke. "Hey, old-timer," Ox called out. "That merchant owes me respect, and you're poking your nose where it don't belong." Nathaniel straightened, vertebrae popping in his back. "This man owes you nothing," he said quietly, "and I owe you even less." Ox chuckled and drew his revolver. "You got any idea who you're mouthing off to?" "Yes," Nathaniel replied, voice steady as a church bell. "A dead man moving." Ox's brow furrowed, trying to decide if he'd been insulted properly. But a few of the older townsfolk, men with long memories and a taste for ghost stories, felt the hair rise on their necks. One drunk named Pete whispered, hands shaking, "Lord help us, that old fella, is it him?" Nathaniel didn't reach for a gun, he just waited. Inside the Black Ace, Marcus Sutton caught sight of him through the dirty window. His blood turned to ice. The past had finally ridden up to his doorstep. Marcus dropped his glass. It shattered against the floorboards, but he didn't seem to notice. His gaze stayed locked on the old man standing in the street, on the crooked scar that ran along Nathaniel's jaw. "Can't be," he muttered. "We left him bleeding out in the desert." But they hadn't, and Marcus knew it. 16 years earlier, after the Cross home burned, Kyne's old crew had scattered to the wind. Marcus changed names like shirts, jumped from gang to gang until he ended up under Victor Kyne. But in all that time, he'd never stopped looking over his shoulder. He'd always known a ghost might ride in one day. Now that ghost stood in the dust. Outside, Ox still had his gun trained on Nathaniel when Victor Kyne pushed through the batwing doors, drawn by the sudden, unnatural quiet. "What in blazes is going on out here?" he barked. Victor Kyne stepped into the light, tall, around 35, his face pocked with old pox scars, his eyes as dead and black as coal at the bottom of a cold stove. Ox answered without dropping his aim. "Old man decided to meddle, boss." Victor looked Nathaniel up and down, just an aged drifter in worn clothes, standing his ground like he owned the street. "You crazy old-timer," Victor scoffed. "You got some kind of death wish." Nathaniel met his stare with frostbitten calm. "I'm not looking to die, I'm looking for someone." "Who?" Kyne asked. "Marcus Sutton," Nathaniel said. "I know he's here." The air turned still. Kyne's brow knotted. Several of his men shot quick, nervous glances toward the saloon. At the window, Marcus stood stone still. "Never heard of any Marcus Sutton," Kyne lied. "Name don't ring a bell." "Yes, you have," Nathaniel said, "and he sure as sin knows me." Marcus stepped out onto the boardwalk, hand brushing his gun but not drawing it. A fear he hadn't felt since his younger days wrapped itself around his ribs. "Nathaniel Cross," he whispered, voice cracking, "we thought you were dead." "I was," Nathaniel replied, "until I heard you were still breathing." Kyne turned to Marcus, confused. "You know this old fool?" Marcus swallowed hard. "He's the silent rider." In that moment, the whole town understood who they were really looking at. Nathaniel Cross, the man rumored to have killed 40 men without ever losing a single duel. The deadliest showdown the West had ever seen was about to take shape. Kyne laughed, the sound dry and brittle, cutting through the hush. "The silent rider," he scoffed, "that campfire ghost the drunks mumble about." He turned back to Nathaniel, disdain curling his lip. "Listen, Grandpa, I don't care what stories you swallowed. I run Copper Ridge, and if you want Marcus, you'll have to go through me and my 25 boys." Nathaniel never took his eyes off Marcus, as if Victor Kyne weren't even there. "25 men don't trouble me," he said softly. "I've killed more for less." The laughter died on Victor's tongue. There was something in that voice, an awful certainty, a calm that only comes to men who have stared death in the face so often it stopped surprising them. Marcus took a step back. "Victor, listen to me," he urged. "This man ain't a story. I saw him put 8 men in the ground in under 12 seconds. He doesn't just shoot, he executes." "You're shaking at a ghost," Kynes snarled, hand drifting toward his revolver. "You've lost your nerve." Nathaniel spoke quietly, but the entire street heard him. "I'll give you one chance, Kyne. Hand Marcus over. Let me finish what I began 16 years ago and I'll ride out. You and your men keep your town, your saloon, your lives. No one else has to die today." "And if I say no?" Kyne asked. "Then they all die," Nathaniel replied. "One at a time in whatever order I decide." He glanced at Marcus, "And he'll be last so he can watch his friends fall before him." Kyne spat into the dirt. "The old bastard, out of his mind. Boss, let me blow his brains out," one of the gunmen barked. Victor raised a hand, halting him, eyes narrowing as he studied Nathaniel, hunting for fear, for doubt, for some hint of hesitance. He found nothing, just that empty gray stare, colder than a grave. "You've got until sunup tomorrow to clear out of Copper Ridge," Victor said finally. "If you're still here come dawn, I'll put you in the ground myself." Nathaniel nodded once. "Tomorrow at first light, Main Street, you, me, and Marcus," he said. "May the Lord pity whoever walks away." Then he turned and headed back toward the boarding house, 25 armed men watching him go, none of them quite breathing right. Marcus sagged against the saloon wall, sweat running down his neck. Deep inside, Victor Kyne felt something he wasn't used to feeling. He began to wonder if Marcus was telling the truth. Dawn bled red over Copper Ridge. The sun hadn't cleared the horizon yet when Nathaniel came down the boarding house stairs. 2 revolvers hung low in worn leather on his hips, his hat pulled down, his footsteps measured and heavy, like a soldier walking toward his final campaign. Widow Harrison waited with a cup of coffee in hand. "You don't have to face them," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am," Nathaniel said, "I do." He drained the cup in one swallow and laid a few silver coins on the table. "If I don't make it back, that'll cover the room and whatever it costs to plant me." Outside, the town held its breath. Shutters were latched tight, curtains twitched then stilled. Nobody wanted a front row seat to what was coming. Nathaniel walked to the middle of Main Street and stopped in front of the saloon. The sun began to climb, painting the sky in shades of rust and blood. The batwing doors flew open. Victor Kyne stepped out first. Behind him came Marcus Sutton, pale as chalk, shaking, and then 23 armed men fanned out, rifles, shotguns, and pistols, all pointing at a single old man. Victor smiled a thin, cruel smile. "Last chance, Cross, find yourself a horse and ride out. No need for you to die here today." Nathaniel spat in the dust. "I've been dead 16 years already," he said. "All that's left is to finish the work." Victor gave a signal with his hand. His men spread out in a wide half-circle. This wasn't a duel, they were building a firing squad. "Got any last words?" Kyne asked. Nathaniel looked past him, straight into Marcus's eyes. "Your boss ordered my family burned alive," he said quietly. "You were the one holdin' the torch. They begged, you answered with flame." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, tears carved lines through the dust on his face. I didn't want to," he choked. "But you did," Nathaniel replied. Silence swallowed the town whole. Kyne lifted his arm. "Aim." 23 gun barrels rose in unison. Nathaniel didn't budge. His hands hung loose near his guns, relaxed, ready. The wind died. The world seemed to stop moving. Then 5 men dropped where they stood. Kyne's command never finished. Nathaniel moved. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, history rewrote itself. His hands turned into a blur. Both Colts cleared leather with insane speed for a man his age. Bang bang. 2 men crumpled before a single trigger from their side could break. Bullets meant for Nathaniel chewed dirt where he'd been an instant before. He rolled sideways, sliding behind a water trough. Bang bang bang. 3 more gunmen went down hard. Every shot was placed deliberate, no panic, no wasted motion, only technique hammered into his bones by decades of hard killing. Kyne's men fired blindly at dust and shadows while their partners fell, one after another. 40 seconds later, 15 of them lay dead or dying on the street. Victor stumbled backward toward the saloon doors, hands shaking as he jammed cartridges into his revolver. "He's not human," he screamed. "He's the devil himself." Marcus stood frozen, gun slack in his hand, unable to fire, unable to flee. He could only watch as Nathaniel walked forward, steady and relentless like a noose tightening. The last 5 gunmen broke and charged in desperation. Bang, 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 bang. They fell where they ran. Now it was just Victor Kyne, Marcus Sutton, and the old man who stalked toward them like death taking his time. Nathaniel stopped 20 paces from Victor. 23 down, he said calmly, 2 left. Marcus dropped to his knees. "Do it, Nathaniel," he pleaded, "end this." Kyne raised his final revolver, not at Nathaniel but at Marcus. "If I go, this traitor's coming with me," he snarled. Bang! The shot thundered through the still morning. Marcus stayed kneeling, unharmed, behind Nathaniel. Victor Kyne was the one who toppled backward, a neat hole drilled between his eyes. Nathaniel's gun was still up, smoke curling from the barrel. "That one was for my family," he said. He holstered his pistols and looked down at Marcus. "You get to live," he told him. "Spend what's left of your days being a better man than the coward you were." Without another word, Nathaniel turned as a black horse stepped out from the edge of town as if called by his name alone. He swung into the saddle and rode toward the rising sun. The silent rider faded into the horizon and into legend. Copper Ridge was finally free. 23 men lay in the town's dust, never to rise again. One shattered soul had been given a chance to change. Justice doesn't always ride in with a badge or sit in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes on a dark horse, carried by a ghost that refuses to stay buried. Marcus wept, caught between the horror of the slaughter and the weight of the mercy he did not deserve. Copper Ridge would never forget the day the silent rider came back. Stories of Nathaniel Cross would ripple through saloons and campfires for generations to come. Of a man who seemed to kill with a look, whose vengeance was exact and whose mercy chose its own hour. The town exhaled at last. The full sun climbed high, casting long shadows over streets still scarred yet alive. Far out along the skyline, a black horse dwindled to a speck, then vanished, leaving behind only dust and a hush that settled in like a prayer. Nathaniel Cross, the silent rider, had finished what he'd started 16 years before. By doing so, he became something more than flesh and bone. He became a warning, a tale, a legend. And that's how Copper Ridge crawled out from under fear's boot heel and stood tall under the same relentless sun that had once watched it burn. Nathaniel Cross didn't just claim revenge, he proved that evil doesn't get to rule forever. Even the blackest midnight has to answer to the dawn. Some say he disappeared beyond the far hills. Others swear they catch sight of his black horse on the desert edge when the moon is full, just standing, just waiting like judgment bidding its time. Maybe he still rides, dragging the ghosts of his past behind him, listening for the next town that needs a reckoning. But one thing's sure, where justice hesitates, legends don't sleep. And if you ever find yourself near a canyon at dusk, when the wind snakes through the rocks just right, you might swear you hear it too. Bang bang. Not thunder. Not echo. Justice whispered on the wind. "Now you tell me, partner. If you'd been standing in Nathaniel's boots, would you have spared Marcus, or laid him in the dust with the rest?" Drop your answer in the comments. I'd truly like to know what kind of justice lives in your heart. And if you've ridden with me this far, through every shot, every silence, every shadow of this tale, thank you. You're the reason this storyteller's fire keeps burning. Before you ride off, tap that like button if this story set your pulse running. Hit subscribe so you won't miss the next ride into the wild frontier. And let me know where in the world you're listening from. It never stops amazing me how far these trails reach. Till the next story, partner. Keep your gun clean, your spirit unbroken, and your honor sharp. Out here on the frontier, justice doesn't always wear a star. Ride safe. And may the legend of the silent rider never fade from your memory.